Throughout the 2000s, there were a lot of great players in NBA history that are some of the greatest players of all time. You have the late great Kobe Bryant, you have Shaquille O'Neal, who was one of the most dominant players at his peak, Dirk Nowitzki, who revolutionized the big man position, and you can't talk about big men in the 2000s without talking about the dominance of Tim Duncan in the San Antonio Spurs. But one player that people talk about but don't truly understand how dominant he was at his absolute peak is Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett was one of the greatest players of all time when he was at his best in Minnesota, and along with Dirk Nowitzki, they had probably the most influence on the modern day big man in the league today. But unfortunately, he was cursed for his talent by being drafted to one of the worst organizations in NBA history, being the Minnesota Timberwolves. And in today's video, we're going to talk about how the Minnesota Timberwolves wasted Kevin Garnett's prime to the point that they couldn't even give him enough pieces to make the NBA Finals even one time. But before we go any further, if you guys could show your support by dropping a like, I would really appreciate it. You guys have been showing so much love on these career deep dive videos, so I'd appreciate if you can keep that up. But without further ado, let's get back to the subject at hand and talk about how one of the smelliest organizations in NBA history, the Minnesota Timberwolves, wasted one of the greatest primes of all time in Kevin Garnett.
With the fifth pick, 1995 NBA draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Kevin Garnett, Aragon Academy in Chicago.
The high school kid is the number 5 pick in the NBA draft. Kevin Garnett, 19 years old. Won't be 20 until next year, so he's a young 19.
Now this story begins in a more unique way than others. See, Kevin Garnett came out of high school due to the NBA not having their silly one and done rule back in the day as compared to now. KG's even come out and said in other interviews that if he was gonna go to any college, it would have been the University of Maryland. But thanks to his agent, he was able to invite 13 out of the 14 lottery teams in the upcoming 95 NBA draft to come and watch a couple of his workouts, and it caught their eyes. So from that point forward, he was set to go straight into the NBA out of high school. Garnett was taken with the 5th overall pick to the Minnesota Timberwolves in the 1995 NBA draft and became the first player to be drafted directly out of high school since 1975. The Timberwolves were a fairly new franchise as they joined the NBA in the 1990 season, and KG was drafted to play in the 1996 season, so they only been around for half of a decade damn near. And in all of those years, they had never even won more than 29 games, so you can imagine the situation that he was walking into straight into the NBA out of high school, mind you. KG wasn't like a lot of other straight out of high school players like Dwight Howard, LeBron James that just walked into the NBA and dominated from day one. It took him a lot of more time to develop his game. As to start off his rookie season, he wasn't even a starter. He got off to a little bit of a rocky start as even the team as a whole, they weren't really set in their direction as they had to replace their head coach in the middle of the season from Bill Blair to Flip Saunders. Despite playing pretty mid in the beginning of his rookie year, he showed a lot of promise in the second half of the season, especially on the defensive side of the ball. He was able to guard multiple positions at least an adequate level. He wasn't the defender that he would later become, but he was a pretty decent and capable defensive player. Great lateral quickness, able to move on the perimeter with his feet, sliding it, and was also a very good shot blocker, especially from the help side. In the second half of the season, where he became a full-time starter, he averaged 14 points a game, nearly 9 rebounds and 2 assists, along with the steal and a half, and over 2 blocks a game while shooting 53% from the field. Offensively, he was coming along very nicely, especially towards the second half of the season where he became that full-time starter, and his impact on both ends was felt deeply. So it was from that moment that the Timberwolves knew they had their franchise guy moving forward, because this was somebody coming out of high school. And I always think about that because just imagine if guys like LeBron and Kevin Garnett, guys who are physical specimen that dominated the NBA, especially as rookies in the case of LeBron, imagine if they went to college. They would be even more dangerous, especially on that level. But despite the flashes he showed in his rookie year, the Timberwolves would obviously fail to miss the playoffs yet again. But at that time, he was young and actually the youngest player in NBA history at that point. And among all rookies, he was considered one of the better ones, making an all-rookie team. But going forward, the sky was the limit for Kevin Garnett, and in his sophomore season, he cemented that fact even further as he made his first All-Star appearance. Defensively, he was able to improve on what he already started in his rookie year year, going from capable to an even greater level on that side of the ball, but offensively is where the true improvement lies, as he took his average from 10 points a game in his rookie season to 17 points a game in his sophomore year, along with 8 rebounds and 3 assists, over 2 blocks on 50% from the field. KG improved in all areas as a scorer. He finished better at the rim, his mid-range shooting was exceptional for a player of his age and at his position, and his ability to see the floor was exceptional. Along with teammate Marbury, who was a rookie at the time that they made a draft day trade for, they were able to lead the Timberwolves to their first ever playoff appearance. They won 40 games, which yes is below 500, but it's a drastic improvement from the year before where they won less than 30. And though they were swept in the first round, the duo of Marbury and Kevin Garnett together was a really intriguing one, and the steps they made as a team collectively with their success, going from a non-playoff team to a playoff team and increasing their wins by nearly 15, the Timberwolves' future looked brighter than ever. But then in August of 1997, there were a lot of back and forths between Kevin Garnett and his agent with the Minnesota Timberwolves with his contract extension. It was a really hot debate between a lot of people in the NBA community on what kind of money that Kevin Garnett earned, even though he was a former all-star and showed a lot of promise in his first couple of seasons. The fact that he was asking for a lot more money than players like Alonzo Mourning and even guys like Juwan Howard, it raised the question among the community on if he was worth that amount of money. But thankfully, the Timberwolves came to their senses, and 1 hour before the deadline on the 1st of October in 1997, the Timberwolves and KG agreed to a 6-year contract extension worth $126 million, which was the highest paid contract in NBA history. The contract was so much, especially for a player of Kevin Garnett's status that hadn't even been in the league for at least 5 seasons, to the point that many people thought it was a risky move and would prohibit the Timberwolves from signing a lot of new players due to how much of the cap that his contract was taking over. Some sports writers even credited Kevin Garnett's extension as for the reason why there was a lockout shortened year in the 1998 NBA season. But despite those haters and critics, KG went out there and improved his averages yet again and led the Timberwolves to another franchise winning season. They won a franchise record 45 games and also won their first 2 NBA playoff games in franchise history. Now some of you guys may be wondering, where are the Timberwolves wasting KG in this scenario? Well, that brings me to his 4th season in the NBA, where his superstar career took off. As like many other seasons leading up to the 1999 year that was a lockout shortened year, he averaged another career high all across the board. He would eclipse over 20 points per game for the first time in his career, averaging nearly 21 points and 10 rebounds along with 4 assists, 2 blocks and 2 steals on 46% shooting from the field. KG was doing things that we truly hadn't seen a lot of big men do at that point in time in NBA history. He was going coast to coast with the ball, he was playmaking in the half court in transition, out the high post, low post. He was great on the boards, averaging nearly 4 offensive rebounds a game, and for the first time in his career he made an All-NBA team, the 3rd team to be exact. So as an individual, Kevin Garnett had a successful season, dominating in every way, shape or form. Offensively he was a beast, defensively he was a beast, he got the accolades, he got the recognition, and all the doubters that said that contract was a mistake and quote unquote too risky, they looked like fools because he had a breakout season for the ages. But unfortunately, looking at the team roster, it was very hard for them to consistently win games considering what they went through before the season even started and even throughout the season itself. As before the season even started, they would lose their 20-point per game scorer and Tom Gilliota to free agency as he left for the Phoenix Suns. And then after only 18 games in the season, which they started off 12-6, the Timberwolves would decide to trade Marbury, who had great chemistry with KG at the time, in exchange for all-star point guard Terrell Brandon. Now Terrell Brandon was a good player. Like I said, he made multiple all-star teams in the past before they made that trade. But considering that Marbury was 22 and Terrell Brandon was 28, coming off of an injury-riddled season the year prior, and Marbury had chemistry already built with KG and they started off on a hot note being 12-6, it just never made sense for them to make that decision, especially at that time. And it was shown immediately that season, as to close off the year they went on a below 500 record of 13-19. They would finish off the season barely making the playoffs with a 500 record of 25-25, and they would lose yet again in the first round inevitably to the San Antonio Spurs. The Terrell Brandon trade was not only head scratching, but it was the beginning of a horrible decision making process for the Minnesota Timberwolves about their point guard position. Because if you thought it was bad, it's only going to get worse as we continue with this video. Because if we're being fair, you can't truly judge a trade without giving it some time to marinate with both teams first. Well, okay, let's look at how it panned out for the Timberwolves the following season. As in the 2000 NBA year, Kevin Garnett once again had another career year, averaging 23, 12, and 5, along with nearly 2 blocks and 2 steals on 50% shooting from the field and 76% at the free throw line. He would not only make a first-team All-NBA, but he also finished first-team All-Defense, which was the first defensive team selection of his entire career, and finished second in MVP voting. He would lead the Timberwolves to another franchise record-setting 50 wins, and alongside him, Terrell Brandon actually had a pretty solid season, averaging 17 and 9 assists. But unfortunately, in the playoffs, they got their shit smacked as Kevin Garnett had a pretty rough series, shooting below 40% from the field. Those Portland Jailblazers, they really locked him the hell up in that series. So even though they did lose in the playoffs that year, so far so good as far as this trade is looking right now. It looks like Terrell Brandon's injuries are left in the past, as he did play a majority of the season, and even though Kevin Garnett choked in the playoffs, it was clear they needed to relieve some of the offensive scoring on his plate, or at least the carrying of the team on both ends, if we're being quite honest. So the next season they went out to get Chauncey Billups to be the backup point guard to Terrell Brandon, because he did have some injury problems in the past, and it would relieve some ball handling responsibilities from him and KG. But unfortunately, that's really all the moves they made to that roster going into the 2001 NBA season, so the results were almost identical, except KG actually played well this time in the playoffs, unlike the year prior. So as you can see, it's now 3 straight years of KG performing at an MVP caliber level, an elite level on the defensive side of the ball, making all NBA teams, all defensive teams, and even being top 5 in MVP voting, but yet the results are just him losing in the first round over and over and over again. Mind you, a lot of the point guard issues that they would run into later on in the tenure of Kevin Garnett's career with this team could have easily been solved with numerous draft picks that they lost in the Joe Smith scandal, as Joe Smith was a highly sought after free agent a couple of years prior, and the Timberwolves landed him with a 1-year deal, which was very odd because obviously a player is going to maximize the money that they can get once they hit the market, and considering he turned down multiple long-term deals, it was just very confusing. And when he did it the second time the year following, it was very clear what the Timberwolves were doing. They had made a deal with him that they were going to get his bird rights after him signing a couple of 1-year deals with the team, which is obviously illegal. You cannot give incentives to sign contracts that are lesser than his real value. The NBA punished the Timberwolves by stripping them of 3 first-round picks that could have resulted in players like Tayshaun Prince, Anderson Varejao, and obviously the big one being Tony Parker. But in the 2002 NBA season, that's where a glimmer of hope came down the tunnel. As though they did lose in the first round again, the signs from his teammate in Chauncey Billups were amazing, as without Terrell Brandon, Chauncey was going off. He was a great 3-point shooter. The chemistry he had with Kevin Garnett in the pick and rolls with the pick and pops also were amazing, which led their offense to being top 5 in points per game and finishing 4th in offensive rating as well. And on the defensive side of the ball, though he wasn't what he was in his Detroit years later on in his career, he was still a pretty capable point of attack defender alongside KG, who was one of the best defenders in the NBA. Chauncey in the playoffs averaged 22, 6, and 5 while shooting 40% from 3 and 45% from the field, while KG averaged 24, 19, and 5 along with 2 blocks and 2 steals. And though they did get swept in the first round, it was very clear that Chauncey was the right guy alongside KG just off of their play together. If they could just retool that roster around those two specifically, the Wolves truly had some magic on their hands with their duo. But unfortunately, Chauncey had a free agency decision to make, as he only had 2 years on his contract, and those 2 years were up after the 2002 NBA season. Chauncey expressed numerous times that he wanted to come back to Minnesota and that he loved playing with Kevin Garnett, but unfortunately the Timberwolves didn't want to match the offer from the Detroit Pistons, and he ended up leaving for nothing. They wanted to stick it out with Terrell Brandon, which truly makes no sense whatsoever. The guy was injury prone before you got him. You moved him for a young player even, and then after you got him, he was still getting hurt. And now you're in a situation where you have a young point guard on your roster in Chauncey Billups, and you have Terrell Brandon. The logical thing would be to just move Terrell and get assets to build around your new duo in Chauncey and KG. But no, they decided to move on from Chauncey by letting him walk for nothing. This guy was seen as a bust before he even came to your team, and now he's rebuilt his stock to the point that he was seen as a highly sought after free agent, but you're still gonna make the same decision by picking Terrell over him? Man, I wonder how this story is gonna end for Chauncey.
21 points a game, over 5 assists. The 2004 NBA Finals MVP, number 1, Chauncey Billups.
And by the way, did I forget to mention that Stephon Marbury had already become an all-star for the New Jersey Nets and averaged over 20 points per game for 3 consecutive seasons for them? It seemed like both of the decisions they made to keep Terrell Brandon, or at least acquire him in exchange for giving up the other young point guard that they had that already showed promise, it just never panned out. And unfortunately, it cost them big time, especially considering what Kevin Garnett became and accomplished for them over the next couple of seasons. Because after another career season in 2003 leading them to another franchise record of 51 wins, they lose yet again in the first round, this time to the Los Angeles Lakers with Kobe and Shaq. So that offseason they decided to part ways with Terrell Brandon, which was very obvious at the time that they needed to do. And as a side note, I truly do always wonder, what if the Timberwolves kept Stephon Marbury or they kept Chauncey Billups alongside KG? Because in that 2004 season, if they were playing with him, my goodness, they could have been scary. As in the offseason of 2003, the Wolves made key pickups of Latrell Sprewell from the New York Knicks and soon to be all-star point guard Sam Cassell, who averaged 20 points per game for them in 2004. Sprewell impacted them on the defensive side of the ball and just gave them another presence in that front court alongside KG, and along with Sam Cassell, who was a very good playmaker for them and a decent shooter on minimal attempts, but he can knock down a 3 every now and then. It allowed KG to get to his spots offensively and have the best year of his career, averaging 24 points a game, nearly 14 rebounds, along with 5 assists, over 2 blocks, 1.5 steals, shooting 50% from the field and 79% from the free throw line. KG was so dominant that season on both ends of the court that he was awarded with his first and only MVP award. The Wolves that season would have their most successful year in franchise history that still holds up to this day, winning 58 games. They finished 7th in opponents' points per game, 6th in defensive rating, 5th in offensive rating, and 10th in points per game. It was easily the greatest year in franchise history, and in the playoffs they carried over by not only winning their first ever playoff series in the first round beating the Denver Nuggets, but they also won in the second round defeating the Sacramento Kings in a 7-game series. But then came the Western Conference Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers, and it was a pretty rough series for the Timberwolves as a whole. As though they were losing 6 games, it was pretty heartbreaking how it went down because of injuries to Sam Cassell, and without their all-star point guard out with the back injury, they had to rely on Derek Martin and Fred Hoiberg, and even relying on Kevin Garnett's versatility offensively with his playmaking and passing, as using him as a point forward or even putting him as the point guard. You heard me correctly, actually lining him up to run the point. Unfortunately though, after a very valiant effort from KG and Latrell Sprewell, they would lose in 6 games to the Los Angeles Lakers, who would become the eventual Western Conference champions. Some people still wonder to this day if Sam Cassell never went out with that back injury, if the Timberwolves would have won that series. But in the words of Kanye West himself,
I guess we'll never know.
Now I wish I could say things got better for Kevin Garnett, but unfortunately I can't, as after the 2004 season, that was the last time the Minnesota Timberwolves made the playoffs for the next, I believe, 17 years. As from 2005 to 2007, KG averaged 22, 13, and 5 on 50% shooting from the field, and from 2004 to 2007 he led the league in rebounding, and unfortunately in 2 out of the 3 years from 05 to 07 they would have a below 500 record, and in all 3 of those years they missed the playoffs. The reasons being is that Sam Cassell was truly never the same following that back injury in the Western Conference Finals in 2004, and for a point guard that was in his mid-30s, it's truly not that surprising. And throw in the fact that in 2005 that was the last year Latrell Sprewell ever played in the NBA, because he felt that a 3-year $21 million contract was not enough because he has a family to feed. And just like that, the big help he had to reach the heights that he had in 2004, winning winning an MVP and leading the Wolves to a franchise record, it was all gone. And after the third straight year of missing the playoffs for the first time in Kevin Garnett's tenure with the team, Glenn Taylor, who was adamant on keeping Kevin Garnett with the roster, finally decided to listen to trade offers because it was clear they were just going nowhere and Garnett's prime was being wasted. The man was still playing at an elite level, but unfortunately he was past his better days in his career, especially being a big man coming out of high school and being already at the age of 31. Not only would the Timberwolves have looked like an evil team if they tried to stick it out with him, but you're only doing a disservice to your fans and even the organization itself if you keep a player like that and not just move him for assets. You suck with him, so you might as well suck without him and actually get some players that you can develop for the future. Garnett was mentioned in so many different trade rumors involving the Chicago Bulls, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Golden State Warriors, the Indiana Pacers, the Boston Celtics, the Phoenix Suns, and the Dallas Mavericks. Garnett would later confirm that his preferred trade destinations were the Lakers, the Celtics, and the Suns. But then finally on July 31st of 2007, KG was traded to the Boston Celtics in exchange for Al Jefferson, Ryan Gomes, Sebastian Telfair, Gerald Green, Theo Ratliff, cash considerations, Boston's 2009 first round draft pick that was top 3 protected, and this would go down as the largest trade in NBA history just for one player, as the Celtics gave up 7 total assets for Kevin Garnett. And just like that, KG's career with the Minnesota Timberwolves was over. He would go on to reach heights that he had never seen before with the Boston Celtics, winning a championship, going to the finals twice, making multiple Eastern Conference Finals appearances, and cementing his status as one of the greatest players of all time and a top 5 power forward in NBA history. Even though KG had a very successful career, being a Hall of Famer, a top 20 player of all time, and is a legend with both the Boston Celtics and the Minnesota Timberwolves, it truly is disgraceful what the Timberwolves did to his career. Because even though he won a championship with the Boston Celtics, obviously he had to take a step back offensively and focus more on the defensive end, which he even won a Defensive Player of the Year in 2008, the first and only one of his career. It's just truly sad to see that he never really had the chance to win a championship in his prime. Even though he had an amazing 2004 campaign, winning the MVP and taking them to 58 wins in the regular season, the fact that all those other years just consist of him losing in the first round and missing the playoffs for the most part is truly pathetic. And sure, he did have moments where he came up short, but for the most part, KG held up his end of the bargain. It was the organization that didn't hold up theirs. Letting go of a point guard in Stephon Marbury who reached heights that was damn near all-NBA caliber level when he was young and ascending in the league alongside a young and ascending Kevin Garnett in exchange for an older point guard that was dealing with injuries the previous year in Terrell Brandon was already bad enough. But then you have the chance to rectify that with Chauncey Billups, who showed up and showed out for you after Terrell Brandon once again went out with an inevitable leg injury. And you then make that mistake twice? I mean, how incompetent can they be? I mean, just look at what Stephon Marbury did in New Jersey and what Chauncey Billups did in Detroit, and imagine if one of them was alongside KG in 2004. KG's career would look a whole lot different if he just had a competent front office that could consistently build solid rosters around him in his prime. Because it's borderline criminal that the Timberwolves wasted the prime of one of the all-time great players that could defend all 5 positions, run the point guard and the point forward in a playoff series against Kobe and Shaq, was one of the better rebounders in the NBA, leading the league in rebounding for 4 straight seasons, could go coast to coast like it was nothing with incredible handles for somebody at his position, had the mid-range pull-up that was damn near cash, but yet despite his 12 years there, he only made it out the first round 1 time. And it's all because the ownership didn't know what the fuck they were doing. And it's truly a shame that they not only wasted his prime, but they can't even honor it by retiring his number due to the bad blood between Kevin Garnett and Glenn Taylor. And that is the story of how the Minnesota Timberwolves wasted one of the greatest primes of all time in Kevin Garnett. But like I said earlier, if you guys enjoyed this kind of long, deep dive into NBA careers, make sure you drop a like and comment your opinions down below about this video. What do you think about Kevin Garnett's tenure with the Timberwolves? This is your boy Young Mustard signing out. You guys stay safe and have a blessed day. Peace.